Guys, these are 8 masculine political positions, and I know as I share this, a lot of these are probably not going to be popular. Pretty popular with most of our audience here because we all kind of sing to the same tune, but there are going to be a few of these that rub people the wrong way. And if you want to have a discussion, I'm happy to have a discussion about it. But ultimately, we need to start voting for the people who believe in these 8 masculine political positions. Because if we don't, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very bad way. We cannot afford as a country another 4 years of the same or worse. As we come up to election season, I thought it would be very beneficial to talk a little bit about what I would consider masculine political positions. I haven't talked about politics a whole lot in this show, but I believe this election, just like every election, is crucial in the future of this country. And so I want to share some thoughts from a masculine perspective. I would obviously highly encourage you to vote. As I said earlier, this is a very integral part of the American way of life, and it's very crucial that we cast our vote in the millions, tens, if not hundreds of millions of voices to make sure that our voices are heard, that our voices are represented, and that we can steer to some degree the direction of this country. And that's why it's so crucial that we talk about this. Now, again, I'm talking about 8 masculine political positions, but I think it begs the question, what makes it a masculine political position? Well, the reason I would consider this masculine is because the positions that I'm going to share with you today are rooted in our innate ability and desire as men to protect, provide, and preside. So as you hear me talking about these positions, I would love for you to look at it in the context of protection, provision, and then preside, which is synonymous with leadership. I believe that we are uniquely qualified to do this. I believe that God has called us to step up in this way, and we have a moral duty, obligation, and responsibility to ourselves, to our family members, to our neighborhoods, our community members, and to our fellow countrymen. And that's why I look at it through this lens. Now, I'm sure this is going to be a polarizing discussion, but what I would encourage us also is that if we do disagree with some of these things, like I'm sure we will, that we're able to have civil discourse. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that this country is facing when it comes to political divide and contention, is that so few people are willing to have significant and meaningful conversations. Everybody's out to get their talking points in, to make other people feel stupid, to get their viral moments by slandering the other side and telling them how big of an idiot they are. And I've been guilty of that as well. But I would highly encourage us to have thoughtful, considerate, healthy discussions. And I think the best way to do that is to avoid logical fallacies. I've done a podcast in the past. If you want to do a search on logical fallacies in our Order of Man library or the Order of Man podcast, you can certainly do that. But when you avoid logical fallacies and you only engage with parties that are also working to avoid logical fallacies, can you actually have a real and healthy discussion? So without any further delay, let's get into these. These are not in any order, but these are 8 masculine political positions, again, with the foundation or emphasis being on protect, provide, and preside. Number 1, peace through strength. We can argue and we can talk about different political people, but when it comes to our position here on our security here in America and also internationally, it's evident. It's very clear that we can foster peace and stability throughout the world, not just in this country, but throughout the world when we're strong. When we take weak positions, when we kowtow to evil people and terrorist regimes, it just emboldens those people and those regimes to act up and act out. If they know that there is not some sort of economic and physically capable fighting force or deterrent, then it's more likely they're going to push the limits. And this is why you've seen over the past several years rising conflicts in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, why you've seen Russia invading Ukraine, why you have China threatening Taiwan, and you're starting to see some of these powers, these international powers, congregate and work together to continue to push the bounds on what is acceptable and what is not. The reality is that when America is strong, the entire world is safer. Now, I know, and I'll readily admit that we have gotten ourselves into foreign conflicts in which we don't belong. In fact, I was a direct participant of that. I went to Iraq in 2005 and 2006, and I can see now, looking at it, that that's not something that we should have got involved in to the degree that we did. We fight endless wars. We have no meaning or definition of what it actually means to win a war, and we get sucked into all of these little territorial, regional conflicts that we should have no business being involved in. But part of the reason those things get worse is because we are weak. We don't stand up to terrorists and to evil regimes. We don't hold lines against those who would do evil to us and other people. And we think that, maybe we ought to just be kind or be nice or stay out of everything, and then everybody would leave other people alone. Well, clearly that isn't the case. And if anybody believes that it just takes stepping away from for everybody to get along, is just not paying attention. There are evil people in the world who want to do evil things, and it has nothing to do with how nice or kind or acquiescing to their requests you are. They hate you. They hate your way of life. They hate other people. And there's a multitude of reasons for that we're not going to get into today, but evil exists. And if we want to be safe here in this country, and we want the world to be a safer place, then we need to be strong and bold, economically strong, self-sustaining for our natural resources and energy, things like this. And then also our political fighting force, our military fighting force needs to be strong as well. These are deterrents that keep the world safe. All right, number 2 is national sovereignty. This is a masculine political position. And what that means essentially is that we need to close our borders to illegal aliens and to foreign invaders. Again, this is rooted in our ability as men to protect, provide, and preside. If we don't have strong physical borders that keep people out, that we can turn the faucet on to who and when we should allow those individuals in, then we no longer have a country. There's no way for us to vet the amount of people, millions and millions of people pouring in, primarily through the southern border, if we can't close the border. Now, inevitably, when I start talking about these things, people will say compassion and bleeding hearts, and I understand all of that. And if I was living in South America, I would probably make those same attempts. But the reality is you can't continue to open the borders and let people flow through by the millions and say you're a compassionate person. Because what about the people here in America who have ways of lives, who have family members and community members that they want to protect? If you really wanted to be compassionate, then what you would do is you would close the border and you would work tirelessly to enact good pathways to legal citizenship. But we can't do this. It's not sustainable. We're not able to vet. We're not able to protect ourselves and our people. And so we need to shut the borders down. And that's a very masculine position. I realize that there's other people in other countries that are having it hard. I think that there's a case to be made for humanitarian service and efforts that come from the United States into these other countries and regions. But I don't believe it's our obligation or even our responsibility to just open the floodgates and allow ourselves to be victimized, allow ourselves to be vulnerable in ways that we aren't when the borders are closed and more secure. Number 3, taxation is theft. The multitude of taxes that we pay every single day is completely asinine. I just got a bill. I got an email for a bill for some software that I use here in my business. And I got the bill and it was whatever the bill was. And then there was a little tax for Utah withholding and some property taxes and then the federal income tax and then this registration and this line and this line. There was 10 lines of taxes. Now, they all didn't say taxes, fees, things like that, but this is a form of taxation. The government is incapable of creating any value. And so it has to steal value from other people, it has to steal those resources from other people, and it steals from you and me. Now, look, I'm not going to tell you that we as citizens should pay 0 taxes. I don't think that's sustainable either. I think there are some opportunities for us to pay a marginal tax And maybe that's a sales tax or a flat income tax, but all of the other little fees and everything else that are being added up, not to mention the horrible, horrible mismanagement of our resources. Wouldn't it be nice if I could spend other people's money? And what would I do with that money? Well, really, whatever I want. I wouldn't be very prudent with it because I wouldn't need to be. I've got an endless supply of other people giving me their money, and so I can make and afford to make horrible financial decisions. Guys, we need to fight back against the absorbent amount of taxes that we're paying. It's ridiculous. It's stealing. It's immoral. And it's flat out wrong. And it doesn't create a healthy, thriving society. Inevitably, when you get into the tax discussion, on both sides of the aisle, you have concerns about who's getting tax cuts and who's not, and trickle-down economy versus trickle-up economy. But we all know, and even just intuitively, you know, that the people who are making money need to pay taxes, of course, but they're already paying their quote-unquote fair share. Of course, they pay their fair share. In fact, they pay more than their fair share. Common sense would say that, but when you start getting politicians and feelings involved, it's easy to think that the billionaires and the millionaires of the world, since they have all the wealth, aren't really paying any into taxes, that they're taking advantage of the system, that they're paying less than somebody who might be making $30,000 or $40,000 a year. That just isn't the case. And so wherever you can infuse tax breaks into the system, we're going to see increased opportunity. Now, people will complain about trickle-down economics not working because of corporate and billionaire greed. And while greed is certainly something that we have to contend with as people, as human beings, and fight that temptation off, the reality is that those people who are making that kind of money, when given more money, create more opportunities. So maybe there is some greed, but that greed does actually trickle down when you have somebody like Elon Musk deciding to invest in a new business, or Jeff Bezos reaching out into a new space. These individuals are wealthy for a reason, and it's not because they took advantage of people like you and me. It's because they've been able to take their resources, apply them in a very intelligent way in a market that helps reward them for innovation and infusing capital into the economy. So we want people to have tax breaks, not just the rich, not just the poor, but everybody. And so we need to fight against taxes, and we need to make sure that we have a balanced budget so that we can actually use our fewer tax dollars more effectively than they're currently being used. Let's move into number 4. This one's always a big one, but it's the Second Amendment. You know, that's a masculine political position, a strong believer in the power of the Second Amendment. And inevitably, when you start talking about the Second Amendment, people will say, well, there's no reason for you to have an AR-15. You don't need that to shoot a deer. The Second Amendment says nothing about hunting. Now, granted, I love to hunt, and having the ability to do so without having a whole bunch of unnecessary red tape and bureaucratic bullshit is a pretty nice thing. But that's not why we have the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is to protect ourselves from not only foreign invaders, but also our government. Our government, left unchecked, will definitely take advantage of the population. In fact, it already does, and we're armed. Imagine what they would do if we were unarmed. Now, people will say, yeah, but if we had less guns on the streets, then we'd have less crime. I don't really know that that's true. And I think intuitively it makes some sense, but the reality is we have tens of millions of guns in the hands of United States citizens. So if we issued, for example, some sort of government mandatory buyback program, not those 10 million guns are not coming off the street. Okay. Sure. Some of them are the people who would voluntarily give up their firepower. Certainly, those people will give up their guns, but everybody else who has their guns will either not use them, or if they do, they won't be doing it legally, or they're already criminals. And so we're taking the opportunity for us humans, men, to protect ourselves and our people. And obviously that's going to create all sorts of problems. You look out throughout human history, and when a civilization is disarmed, things go terribly, terribly wrong. Murder, and horrific crimes against humanity. We need to be armed. Now, I will say that we should be responsible enough to understand how to use our firearms, that we need to be aware of those who are criminals, that they don't get their hands on firearms, those who are mentally unstable. There needs to be some awareness of that, of course. And I don't think any sane person is actually fighting against that. But when you start taking good, healthy, moral people and treat them like they're the problem because they own the firearm, it's just a ploy, it's just a tactic to disarm a civilization so that you can exploit, take advantage, rape, and otherwise pillage those people. And I, for one, am not interested in letting that happen. And I don't think any man should allow that to happen or be on board with that. If you don't want to own a firearm, don't own a firearm. If you don't want to be around firearms, don't be around firearms. But I would highly, highly encourage you to arm yourself, get the training you need, and learn how to use your firearms. The next, and I think I'm on number 5 here, another masculine political position is that the family unit is the fundamental unit of society. I talked about this in the context of protect, provide, preside, and this one specifically falls in the realm of preside. It's our job as men to lead our families effectively. And if we can't lead our families effectively, then Big Daddy government would love to come in and step in and take your place as a man. It's unfortunate when it happens, but it happens all the time. And the government loves nothing more than to see families fall apart. And in fact, it rewards that happening. And there's all sorts of government programs and benefits and no-fault divorces becoming a thing that create real opposition to keeping the family unit intact. Now, look, some of you might be saying to yourself, well, Ryan, you went through a divorce. You don't have the same nuclear family that you did before. And while that's true, I still am a huge proponent of it. I still believe in marriage. I still believe in the power of a nuclear family. I still believe in having mom and dad in the home. And if that can't happen for one reason or the other, it's a shame and it's a travesty, but it's our job as men, even myself as a divorced father, to do everything that I can to lead my children effectively and righteously, to provide for them financially, spiritually, and emotionally, to teach them lessons, to create opportunities, to teach them how the world works, and to lead them in righteousness. The more men are out of the picture, the easier it is for the government to come in, swoop in, and start indoctrinating our kids into ideologies that are dangerous and pervasive. Now, some people will say, well, Ryan, isn't that all you're doing when you're raising your kids? Sure, I'll give you that. I'm teaching them a doctrine, a way of life, something that I believe is going to serve them. But here's the difference. I have the authority to do so. The government does not have authority over my children to do so. By whose authority? God's. God has given me that authority to raise my children. And so, yes, you might want to use the term indoctrination or brainwash. Of course, those two terms have negative connotation, which is why people use them. But yeah, you are teaching your children a set of beliefs that you think are going to help serve them in the long run. We need strong, righteous, bold, independent people. And the best way to do that is not through a government who takes and steals and manipulates and coerces and abuses its population, but by allowing fathers who are deeply connected physically, mentally, and emotionally with their children to lead them, to guide them, to instruct them. Now, when I talk about this, a lot of the times I'll hear from people who say, well, what about children without fathers? What about them? And here's my answer to that. It's our job as members in the community, men specifically, to step up and to help those young people. Yes, there are millions and millions of children who don't have fathers in the home. Those people need to be served too. And so it's your responsibility as the father of those kids' friends, your sons and daughters, to bring them in, to teach them, to lead them, to guide them, to instruct them, to mentor, to coach, to train, to love. That's what they need. They're not going to get that through the government. They just become another cog in the wheel. Look at the foster system. Look at child protective services. Look at the adoption system. It's horrible. It's horrendous. These kids are struggling because the government's trying to do it. Instead, it should be our job to do it. in the absence of our own children, or even if you do have your own children, to bring other people into the fold, if you will, by leading them, teaching them, guiding them, and instructing them. Let's get into number 6, capitalism, free markets, and the meritocracy. I cannot tell you how many people, even otherwise conservative people, would say that the capitalism is bad. Capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty. It's addressed and solved more medical conditions. It's improved the way of life for more people than any other system combined. It is a beautifully, beautifully crafted system. Now, that's not to say it's not without its flaws. It does have its flaws. And yes, corporate greed is part of that to some degree. Another flaw is when you start getting the government involved in some of these affairs. And that's what we would call crony capitalism, not to be confused with capitalism. I'm a firm believer in free markets, and what we have today isn't even free. There is so much regulation and bureaucracy and bullcrap that certain businesses can't even do business, or they're hamstringed completely because Big Daddy government's trying to come in not to do what they say they're doing to protect its population, but to protect and consolidate its own power. So it's our job to edify and to uplift and to honor and then utilize the free markets, to vote people into office who believe in free markets, who want to do away with unnecessary regulation. Energy is a great example of that. You know, I cannot fathom why somebody would say we don't want to create any energy or extract any natural resources to provide energy here in the United States. And they'll tell you, well, it's because of the green initiatives, right? But if that were the case, then they'd have just as big a problem with Russia doing it or any other country doing it that we happen to be importing our energy resources from. It's not a principled position. If it were, then there would be an issue with every country doing it. And that clearly isn't the case. We as the United States of America are expected to hamstring ourselves, knowing that every other country in the world is not playing by the same rules that we are. Now, there's ways to do this responsibly. There's people that need to be involved in the process who are knowledgeable and smart and have experience and education in these systems and these ways of extracting our natural resources. But we need to embrace the meritocracy. We need to embrace free markets. We need to embrace using and creating our own sources of energy, our own fuels, our own food supply systems. And we can do that through the free markets. Now, there has to be a level playing field. I'll give you that. And I think there is a need in some instances for the government to be involved to create some of those level playing fields. But that's not what's happening. When you have certain industries being subsidized and others being hamstringed, that has nothing to do with a level playing field. That has more to do with who's lining whose pockets and the political gamesmanship that we see to keep people in power. All right, let's move on to number 7, the rule of law. We often hear that no one is above the law, and I would agree, but there seems to be a separate system for certain people, the elites, if you will, that they're no longer subject to the same rules and laws and requirements that we are. Man, if we want to protect our people and we want to embrace these free markets and we want to be able to have our firearms and we want to own property and we want to pursue our own life, liberty, and happiness, then we need to know that we have a rule of law in place that does not discriminate, but is even and objective in its application of the law. Why should there be a different set of rules for different people? Whether that's based on economic status, income status, immutable characteristics like sexual orientation, or the color of somebody's skin. No, it should be all the same. And we need to elect politicians who believe in the rule of law and who have no qualms about administering it fairly and justly. Isn't that how law is supposed to be administered anyways? Justice is blind, or at least it was or ought to be, but it isn't in this country. And so we need to make sure that we have representatives who represent us and understand that we can't have criminals and thugs and crime running rampant throughout the cities all throughout the United States, because it creates real problems with some of these other things. And it keeps honest, hardworking Americans from pursuing what they have a right, a God-given right, as acknowledged in our founding documents. we need rule of law. And if a politician doesn't believe in rule of law, then they should not get your vote. All right, the last one here, this is a big one, is equality but not equity. Now, I talk about this often, and it still seems to me that there's some confusion between equality and equity. So let me explain it as briefly as I can here. Equality is making sure that everybody's being treated fairly and equally. That's where the word equality is from. That's the root word is equal, that we're all being treated equal. Equity means that we have equal outcomes. So you've heard certain politicians who will say, because different people are starting at different places, that they might need more in order to get them to the same place. Well, that is communism. And I hope you understand that's communism. And I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. The government cannot create anything. It just takes resources and then redistributes them in a way it feels is appropriate. So if it cannot create resources, where does it get the resources to make up the difference, so to speak, so that somebody who maybe wasn't born with the same economic advantages as somebody else can end up in the same place? Well, they steal it. They can't create it, so they steal it. And they steal it from you, and they steal it from me, and they steal it from the backs of hardworking Americans who want nothing more than to be left alone and to live their righteous lives, raising their kids and pursuing their own pursuits, interests, hobbies, activities, and fulfillment. Okay, I don't know where we came up with this idea that everybody's supposed to be equal. Of course, that's not true. If you want to look at it at a micro level, athletics. Do I get upset because I'm not 6'7" and the perfect physical specimen to play basketball? Of course I don't, because it sounds silly, right? But equity says that I should be playing with LeBron James and I should be winning just as many games and I should make just as much money as him. Well, that's stupid. Okay. No one actually believes that everybody starts at the same place. And, in many cases, it's unfortunate. It's tragic. How many people, whether they're white or brown or any other race, how many people are born into poverty and, yes, do not have the same economic advantages as those who maybe were born into wealth? Is it the government's job to make up for that? No, it's our job as citizens to help out where we can. And this is why charitable contributions, charitable organizations, learning to be good Christians or even believers in God in general, so that we can be charitable with our time, talents, gifts, and abilities, so that we can lift these people up. It's not the government's responsibility to do that. The government's responsibility is to making sure everybody is treated equal. And then what we do with that is based on our own merits. This is that meritocracy I was talking about earlier. This is the only way to create prosperity and abundance. And it's easy to believe that if the government comes in and saves people who need saving, that everybody's going to be better off. You can't solve problems for people if they don't learn the skills to be able to solve those problems for themselves. We hear this a lot when it comes to homelessness. Well, just get everybody a house. Well, I think that would work for a time, but guess what? Everybody's going to default back into their current behaviors, their current belief systems, the way they currently show up, and we're going to be in the same problems we were a few short years later. It's not an issue of resources. It's an issue of application of the resources people have. So I am not a communist, and men aren't communists, because we believe in individual responsibility. We believe in rugged individualism. We believe that people should be rewarded for their own efforts. That's the meritocracy. And we believe that we are not victims, or should not act like victims or play victims to something that we have control over. Guys, these are 8 masculine political positions. And I know as I share this, a lot of these are probably not going to be popular. Pretty popular with most of our audience here because we all kind of sing to the same tune. But there are going to be a few of these that rub people the wrong way. And if you want to have a discussion, I'm happy to have a discussion about it. But ultimately, we need to start voting for the people who believe in these 8 masculine political positions. Because if we don't, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very bad way. We cannot afford as a country another 4 years of the same or worse. We need to elect politicians who believe in these, who espouse these ideals, And that's not to say the people that we elect are always perfect. We know they're not. But this is what I need from my elected officials. So let's go through them really quickly, and then we'll call it a day. Again, we're looking at each one of these through the lens of protecting, providing, and presiding. Number one, peace through strength internationally. Number two, national sovereignty by closing the border. Number three, realizing that taxation is theft. Number four, belief in the Second Amendment to protect ourselves from people and the government. Number five, the family unit as a fundamental foundation of society. Number six, capitalism, free markets, and the meritocracy. Number seven, the rule of law. And number eight, equality, not equity. If you want to have a follow-up discussion, hit me up on Instagram. Let me know what you think. Share your comments. Shoot me a DM. I'm very, very active over there at Ryan Michler. My last name is spelled Michler. And let's really consider these as we get closer to November. This is a big, big election cycle, not just at the federal level, but also within your states and municipalities. Do we need to start considering who we're bringing in as representatives of us? All right, guys, I hope that serves you. I'm sure I riled a bunch of people up today, so I'd love to hear more about it. And we'll keep having the conversations we need to have. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.